Hi, Deanie here again, and it's week 2, and we're going to be looking at dialogue, speech. What does dialogue or speech do for a story? Well, people don't just put dialogue into a story for the sake of filling out space. Dialogue actually has a purpose, and if you look back at any books that you've read recently, have a look at bits of dialogue and say, how did that help the story progress, or how did that help my understanding of the characters? Dialogue has purpose, and when you write your own dialogue, you need to think, what is it doing? Because dialogue adds voice to a story. It gives it a certain a feel. How do the characters talk? It breaks up the monotony of the author's voice. If you're constantly narrating the story without any dialogue to break it up, it turns the reader off. It just gets a bit too much. It can be used to move a story on very quickly as well. For example, a character can tell the reader something that suddenly makes the reader go, oh gosh, okay, that explains all of that. It can show different points of view about a situation. For example, the reader might think something's going one way, but then the character speaks up and think, oh, I didn't know that, maybe I need to rethink this story. It also allows the author to reveal more information about the characters. Now, what I'm going to do is take you through all of these points so you can understand exactly what I mean by that. Okay, so something I call conversation genres. First thing to know is that authors as a species are nosy. Okay, we like to know what's going on, we like to listen to things, we like to hear other people's conversations, and quite often we like to take note of it and remember it and use it. I like to categorise conversations into genres, and I'm going to list a few of these, and the rest are listed on my blog so that you can go and have a look at them. But I think you'll understand what I mean when I start to list that conversations come in genres. For example, go to any coffee shop and you'll hear banal coffee shop banter. That's just the, oh, nice day, good coffee, all the sort of, nothing particularly said. Schoolgate gossip, mums furtively whispering, oh, she's having a private tutor, or yeah, he's been seen going out with that person. You've got furtive teenage whisperings. If you own a teenager, you'll know exactly what I mean. Frantic family yelling. Most family households in the morning, there's a, where's my bag? Where's my coat? Get a move on, hurry up, the bus is going. Angry strangers arguing. You can imagine what that sounds like. Romantic dueling, the couple who are sort of, arguing but getting a bit sort of steamy about it. Situation controlling, that might be a police officer and someone who's done something wrong, or somebody at an airport controlling a situation, someone who's in charge. I've written down lots of these different fun genres of conversation in the blog post that goes with this video, so have a look at them and see if you can add any of your own ones as well, because they are quite fun. But it does help if you can understand that conversations come in particular varieties, and with them you've got the tone, the sort of language that's used, how close the people are standing when they talk about it, the gesturing they use. So read through and see if you can add any of your own to it as well. So I always recommend that authors and writers take notes of conversations they hear. So if you're in a cafe, if you're standing in the queue in Sainsbury's or wherever, have a little notebook with you and make notes of some of the things people say. Now, just a little warning, do be careful, don't get caught, because you're probably on dodgy ground there. But just really listen to what people say and the way they speak as well. Listen to different age groups. Particularly if you're thinking about writing about teenagers, listen to the way they talk. Sometimes it can sound like they're talking in code. They use very specific words, and those words change probably more often than their socks. So if you're going to talk about teenagers and write about them, use dialogue from teenagers in your stories, be careful not to use too many current words, because those current words won't be current by the time you've actually got your book out there. Now, when you're listening to the different conversations that are going on around you, make notes about things like the use of the language. Would you classify it as formal? Is it casual? Is it colloquial? Is it everyday? What about the speed that people are talking? Some people talk really fast, others talk really slowly. Some people speed up and slow down depending on what they're saying, how much they want to push that conversation out. Is it a really important topic to them? Listen to the speed and see if it's static or if it changes. Listen to repeated words. Everybody has words that they use more often. It depends on the age of the person as well. So have a listen to the different age groups and what words they tend to repeat. How do different accents make English words sound? Different foreign accents, but also different local accents as well. What about unusual intonations? Some people have strange pitches or tones in their conversations. Maybe it goes up at strange points, so they get very high pitched. It's always interesting to note those as well. And pay particular attention to the start of a conversation before the meaty bit. What I mean by that is quite often before somebody gets around to saying exactly what they want to say, they'll put in niceties like, how are you? Oh, I like your top. Oh, you've had your hair done. All those bits and pieces before they actually get to the important stuff in the conversation. Right, so thinking about those fun conversation genres that I've put up there, I'd like you to choose one of them and then choose a couple of different characters that you've heard and write a little bit of conversation between them. Try to use authentic voice. So if you've listened to somebody with a particular accent, try and just put a tiny bit of that accent in. Or if they're using strange intonations or unusual words, try to put those in. Try to make each of the characters you're going to put in this conversation a little bit different. They need to talk differently so they sound like different people. Have a go. What I'm going to do now is to take you through some of the top tips for writing good dialogue. However, I understand that some of you might not have written dialogue since you're at school. So on my blog post that goes with this video, I've included a quick recap of some of the rules of punctuation that go with dialogue. It's in a blue section and it's worthwhile having a look through just to remind yourself. I know I quite often forgot how to write my dialogue at the beginning, or the commas and the speech marks and where it all goes. So if you're not sure, just have a quick look there. I'm not going to be going through it in the video, so that's why I've put it in the post for you to look at. So tip number 1. Avoid making characters tell each other things that they already know. Quite often in a story, you need to give your reader information. Maybe it's about the characters or about something else, and you want to use dialogue to give the reader that information. But you need to avoid information dumping, and what I mean by that is something that feels unrealistic and forced. Here's an example of some dialogue that's giving some information, but that the reader needs to know, but it doesn't feel right. So, how long have we been married, Janet? Well, we got married in Toronto in 2010, so it's almost 10 years. It's not a particularly exciting piece of dialogue because it's just info dumping. It's just giving the reader what they need to know, but without being very exciting. A better way to tell your reader that Janet and her partner were married in Toronto in 2010, and that was 10 years ago. Okay, here's another piece of dialogue that does it a little bit more subtly, a bit more interestingly. Ken and Helen are going to Toronto for their honeymoon. I think they're staying in that awful hotel next to the one we got married in. Did you tell them it was a dump? I didn't have the heart to. Besides, that was over 10 years ago. Hopefully it's improved. So that doesn't feel, hopefully, like I'm dumping information on the reader. That's a bit more of a natural conversation, but still giving the same information. So thinking about that, I want to give you an exercise which is about avoiding info dumping. So this is your brief. 2 couples, Geeta and Sunil, and Arthur and Suzanne are at a party together. They don't really know each other. Geeta is a police officer and her husband writes crime thrillers, whilst working part-time as a solicitor. They have recently adopted Geeta's twin nieces after her sister passed away. Arthur's an architect and he has 2 grown-up children. Arthur and Suzanne are expecting their first child together and live part-time in France. That's an awful lot of information I've just given you there, and that is all in the blog post that goes with this video. Now, I want you to write a conversation between those characters at this party that gives the reader some of this information. It doesn't have to be all of the information because that's too much to get in there, but just pick some bits so that you're feeding the reader with the information without sounding like you're trying to give them information. Try to make it sound natural. And of course, I'd love to see what you've written in the comments on the blog post, so do feel free to put them there. Right, tip number 2. Don't enter a scene at the start of a conversation. Enter the conversation as late as you can, because in written dialogue, you don't need the niceties of normal conversation. For example, a normal conversation might go like this. Hi Jess, how are you? I'm good, Sue. How are the kids? Oh, you know, it's all go in our house. Did you ever get the patio finished? Not yet, we had a bit of an issue with it. Oh, what was that? Well, we dug up a set of human bones. They're investigating them. The reader doesn't want to hear all that first bit. That's not terribly exciting. They want to get straight into the conversation. Now, that may feel odd that you're missing out all the niceties, but if you think about films, you don't hear all the nice stuff, you just get straight into the action, and that's what you need to do with your dialogue as well. So that same scene, but with a little bit of narration first, a bit of narrative first, sorry, and then the dialogue going straight into the meaty part, the interesting bit. Sue placed her coffee on the slightly sticky table and put her hands to her temples and took a deep breath. "Oh, Jess, it's been horrible. Dave dug up the old patio and found remains." "Human remains?" "The police think so. They've taken over our entire garden." It might feel like you're missing out the vital parts, but that's fine. Think of it like this. If you were listening in on a conversation, perhaps when you were a child you listened to your parents, at what point would your ears prick up and you start to take notice? That's the point that the reader wants to start from. That's where they want to go in, so you catch their attention and you don't bore them. Right, so here's what I would like you to do. Here's some information first of all for your exercise. Melanie bumps into a friend at the supermarket who she hasn't seen for many years. Melanie married a billionaire who's just been jailed on suspicion of serious fraud. Your reader doesn't know any of that information, okay? What I would like you to do is to write a short conversation between two characters. Remember to dive straight into the interesting part of the conversation. So you can write an opening paragraph if you want to, describing the two friends meeting in the supermarket for the first time, and then get straight to the point of the conversation. You want to tell the reader about Melanie having married a billionaire and that he's just been jailed for suspicion of fraud. Get straight in there and put it in the blog post comments if you like. Tip number 3, use action beats to enrich your dialogue. Action beats are what some people call the short descriptions of action before, between or after dialogue. Their purpose is to minimise or even negate the need for dialogue tags, the he said, she said, they said bits, while still making it very clear who's speaking, but also giving the characters a sense of emotional state and the setting as well. So for example, this is without the dialogue tag, so the action beats are the first bits. Alex steadied herself, placing a hand softly on Sam's cheek. They've found her. And she's alive, just. Oh, thank God. Sam collapsed into Alex's arms. So I haven't used any dialogue tags there at all, but it's quite clear from the action beats around exactly who's talking and how they're saying it and what they're saying and their actions around it. It can create a sense of urgency, a sense of tension, or even a sense of panic. It really does lift your dialogue up and show how it's being delivered rather than telling how it's being delivered. And you don't need to keep saying who delivered it. So an exercise based on that. Beatrice has been kidnapped. Tom is speaking to the police officer. Write the conversation between Tom and the police officer as he explains what's happened to his daughter. Now, obviously, this is going to be a really panicky conversation and it's going to be coming out quite fast, quite quickly. So use action beats rather than he said, she said, to show how that conversation is urgent and maybe the control of the police officer controlling Tom and getting the information out of him. Obviously, you can use the odd he said, she said. It's not a problem because sometimes you do need to use those just to set out who's beginning to speak. But after that, try and use action beats, descriptions of how the dialogue is being delivered instead, and see how you go. I'd love to see those bits of dialogue in the comments on the blog. Tip number 4, keep your dialogue tags simple. She said or he said or they said is often perfectly adequate for denoting the dialogue. I've just talked about action beats and not using those. Sometimes you obviously need to use the he said, she said, just to show the reader who's speaking, otherwise it can get confusing. Too many adverbs in the dialogue tags. For example, she said nervously, he said dejectedly, she said mournfully, can distract from the actual speech. It's not to say you can't use them, but you need to limit how much you use them. Instead, you can infer how the words are spoken. You can use the characters' actions to demonstrate their mood and the emotion to the reader, rather than stating how the words are actually said. So, for example, it's all right now, she whispered softly. Instead of saying she whispered softly, you could infer that through her actions. Sally bent down and tenderly pushed a stray strand of hair from the child's ear. It's all right now, she said. By giving that action, by saying how the words are said, you don't need to then say she whispered it softly, because it's quite obvious how Sally would have said it when she bent down and whispered in the child and bent down to the child's ear. So you're inferring it. So it's not to say you can't use verbs and adverbs, such as she shrieked, he admonished, they wailed helplessly. Absolutely do use them, just less is more. Don't use them all the time, otherwise it's just too much. So, an exercise. What I'd like you to do is to replace she wailed dejectedly in the dialogue below with she said, and add a sentence to describe your character's mood, actions or feelings to show the reader how Felicity says her dialogue instead. So, I couldn't reach him, she wailed dejectedly. That's the phrase I want you to use. Or you can create your own piece of dialogue with actions instead. But have a go at not using the she wailed dejectedly, put in some more action around it to show how she's delivering that dialogue, and then just have she said. Tip number 5, use dialogue to reveal information about your characters. Now we've already said this, using the characters to reveal what's going on, but this is slightly different. This is revealing information about the characters themselves, what they're like. For example, if you want to reveal that somebody's had a limited education, rather than putting in lots of narrative that can be long and dull and again, just a bit like information dumping, you can reveal this through the way that the character speaks or what they say. In this example, do you want the spaghetti carbonara or the burger? Asked Joe. I don't eat nothing I can't spell, said Jack. So I think you can probably tell that Jack doesn't have that extensive an education. What about the next one? What can you tell about Maria's life and how does Jean feel about it? How can you stand to watch that TV show? It's so not like that, Maria admonished. Because some of us haven't ever lived in the California dream, hissed Jean. And the next one, this family below are probably struggling for money, but quite resourceful. Mum, you need to fix the zipper again, and the inside pocket has another hole. Pop it on the side, said Martha. I've got your dad's best socks to darn first. So you've given lots of information about these characters just through what they're saying. You're telling the reader loads about them. So what I'd like you to do is think about this in the next exercise. I would like you to write a conversation between two characters, Emily, who is medically trained but currently unemployed, and Georgia, who's in a shop with Emily and becomes unwell. Emily sees Georgia becoming unwell, and I want you to create a conversation between them that shows how Emily's trained, what training she's got, what she's doing now. So continue the story from this sentence I'm going to give you. Georgia slumped against the shop counter. Her legs went weak and she felt herself begin to fall. Right, tip number 6, and there isn't an exercise to go with this one, but you can go and try it out at some point. Always try to speak your written dialogue aloud. Test your dialogue. You need to see if it's clunky, if it will flow, if it sounds awkward. It's best, if you can, to find a willing friend who will read your dialogue for you so you can listen to it. Or if you belong to a writer's group, that's the perfect place to test out your dialogue on other people. Because it's really quite difficult to create dialogue that sounds realistic. And you need to read it through lots, but out loud, actually speaking it. Don't just read it in your head, because it sounds entirely different. And if there are clunky bits, your tongue will trip over them. So try out all of your dialogue, and if you've got a willing husband, partner, friend, whoever, kids even, give it to them as they're reading homework, get them to read it out loud for you. Okay, and then number 7, quick note about authentic accents. So it's you might want to write about people, write dialogue for people who have accents, be they foreign accents or local accents. And you need to be able to show your reader that they've got an accent. But the key to writing accents is to not write a lot of the specific words that they say. Just the odd smattering, just the tiniest minimalist bit that will show the reader that they've got some kind of an accent, but won't stop them from being able to read the dialogue properly. If you have a lot of very specific words from Manchester or Liverpool or French words, your reader's going to struggle to read the sentence or the conversation properly. It will make them stumble and it becomes uncomfortable for them. So keep accents to a minimum. So those are all of my tips for week 2, all about dialogue. There's a lot more to dialogue and I'll go through that in other videos as we progress through the courses. But for the moment, that's quite a lot for you to get going with. Again, if you've written any of the exercises up, please do post them in the comments on the blog. I'd love to see what you're doing. And I look forward to seeing you again in week 3, where we're looking at points of view.